Well, hello, and welcome to another episode of Teaching with Madly Learning. Tonight we are live, haven't done that in a while, but I wanted to come live tonight and talk with you about assessment, especially when we're talking about assessment of students and their digital work. Now, a lot of us are assessing our students, if not most of us at this point, are assessing our students through what they're producing for us remotely through remote classrooms or in digital form. However, marking things digitally isn't necessarily new. I have been marking digitally, or I've had the option of students submitting work to me through Google Classroom. We used Google Classroom when I was still in the classroom for about 5 years, I think is how long I have used it. I can tell you that the first set of students who I ever used Google Classroom with are now in grade 12. So maybe it was a little bit longer than that, but that was the first group where I started working with digital tools and having students submit work digitally. But I did want to share with you some of the things that I have done over the years that have helped me to quickly and easily mark student work when it's being submitted digitally. Now, the first thing that I want to talk about is the different types of assessment. So there are three essentially categories of assessment that I break my assessment up into. And there's a little bit of how I view assessment, which cuts out some of my marking. And this is kind of where it helps to reduce some of the marking load, just the way I perceive what needs to be marked, how I mark things, and I kind of prioritize or triage the type of work that gets marked versus the type of work that gets checked versus the type of work that I don't really need to look at. So the three categories are your diagnostic assessment, your formative assessment, and your summative assessment. Now, by far, summative assessments generally take the most amount of time marking. There are some things that you can do to simplify that, but generally speaking, your summative tasks of your tests, your projects, presentations, your big conferences with students, those are going to take the majority of your assessment time. They will take longer. You can simplify some of that in certain ways, but we kind of have to put that aside and just realize that those summative tasks are going to take longer. So one of the things we can do is reduce the amount of summative tasks that we have and make them a little bit broader so that we're not doing it like each and every week, because that's a lot of marking. Diagnostic, I actually will give my students a diagnostic assessment and I will look at it, but I don't fully mark it. It's not something I mark and hand back to students. Its only purpose is to inform my instruction, to see gaps in where students are learning. If there's something that we need to kind of back up because they're not quite ready for the grade level content that I thought we could start week 1, but turns out we've got to go back a few steps. Or alternatively, they've got a lot of background information because maybe that was just a topic that their teacher last year really loved, so they got really deep into it. So they have a lot of information, so we can zoom a little bit forward. I don't necessarily go through and mark it like I would a test. I look at it, I kind of get an impression of it, I make notes kind of what I'm seeing, but it doesn't necessarily, I don't have to mark it or hand it back. The notes I make are just for me. So if they only make sense to me, then that's okay. And I tell the kids right away that this is your diagnostic. This is only to inform what I need to do as a teacher for you. I'm not going to hand it back to you. It's not going to be marked. It doesn't count for anything other than it just tells me how to teach you. So I do inform them of that. So we can kind of take those two off the end and say, okay, we've got diagnostic assessment. I can do what I want with it. If I choose to mark it or not, it's only really up to me. And summative tasks, I can look at reducing the amount of summative tasks that I put into place, but they're going to take a little bit more time. The bulk of our marking seems to come into place with formative. And this is where we mark the formative. We spend a ton of time marking the formative, but yet it might really not take up the bulk of our material that we're using to actually inform our evaluative mark on the report card because it's formative. So I really like to look at all of that stuff that kids do every single day and really decide what is worth my time to spend and mark, what can I just check, and what can I figure out I can assess another way. So let me kind of walk through what I'm thinking of that, what I mean by how we look at that. So I break it up into the formative assessment piece. I break that up into practice work. I break it up into some of what I decide is practice versus what I decide is more informative for me. Now, your first thing that I think, or first thing I do, is I absolutely do not mark everything that the kids do because I don't have time. It just comes down to that. I don't have time. No one has time. I don't mark everything they touch. Sometimes I just check it. Yes, it's done. No, it's not. I don't necessarily check if it's right or wrong. So with that being said, so now you know I don't mark everything. So the second thing that I would say with formative assessment is to really look at what you're handing them and deciding whether or not that is something that you want to spend your time marking later. So if I choose different activities, then I won't have to necessarily mark them. So one way I reduce my marking load is number one, I don't mark everything. Number two, I strategically choose the assignments that I can pick so that I don't have to mark them. I will do things like use a Google form quiz, or I will use boom cards, or I will use opportunities for students to be able to check their own answers. All of those are great ways to be able to give them a task to complete, but there's ways that are built in that allow me to have it marked for me. So that's really helpful for me, is to go through those processes. The other piece that I will do is I will look for time during class where we can take that up. So if I can get some of the load of marking done actually during class time with students, then that saves my free time. So it's not that I really want to just not mark things. I do, but what I really don't want to do is I don't want to mark things in my own free time after school. So if I can find opportunities like taking up work in class where students will mark their own work because we'll take it up in class, then that's a great opportunity for me to not have to mark that after. If I can use self-grading quizzes or use things like boom cards that will mark it for me, then I'm not spending that extra time marking it afterwards. So that is another strategy that I will use. The other way I look at it too is I try to look at assessment as a weekly goal. So when I sit down and I plan, I look at what I'm doing as a weekly goal. So if my weekly goal for math, for instance, is to teach them how to use the box strategy for multiplication, that is the goal for the week, not just for today, but that's the goal for the week. So when it comes to assessment, I know that by the end of the week, my goal is I want students to be able to use the box method. So I can build in things into my week that allows me to assess them by the end of the week. Do they know how to use the box method? So when I'm planning my activities, I can have things like a lesson and a practice activity. If I look at practice activities specifically as just that, practice, things that I don't need to mark, because my mentality is if I can build something in the week that shows that they have applied that practice and they've been able to do it. So one of the things I was doing last year was I was implementing math journals. So if our week goal was multiplication and we were learning the box method, one of their centers tasks was a math journal that was done at the end of the week. They had all of these centers activities. Some of them were practice pages that they self-corrected with an answer sheet. So they did the questions and they had to go up to the answer sheet and correct it themselves. They had hands-on activities as well as a digital activity that they needed to do that would be practice. They knew ahead of time the goal was by the end of the week, you need to be able to use the box method with multiplication. So we had all of these activities built in. I marked none of that practice work because in my mind it was practice. So that meant that if they messed up or if it wasn't great at the beginning, I wasn't going to mark it. What I was going to mark was that math journal. The math journal provided evidence of their learning. It gave me an opportunity for them to explain what it was that we were working on that week. They provided me with examples of what they were doing in the week. So they came up with a question, they answered the question, and then they explained how the box method worked with multiplication. So they handed in that math journal. If they did the practice components of the center's activities all week long, it would help them do the math journal. They would do better on the math journal if they did the practice. Now, in that, I also had opportunities where I had guided math groups. So I would meet with students every week and I would see them do that activity. So I had opportunities where I could be taking in observational information as well as conversation, but I wasn't spending all my week marking their products. So this was something that saved me time. Instead of marking their worksheet for their practice pages, so the textbook work, instead of marking their textbook work and marking their centers building, so they had to do stuff on whiteboards and then they would take pictures of evidence of their learning, instead of having them submit all of that, the only product for that week that I marked was their math journal. And when I looked at the difference between practice products and that journal exit card type activity, it wasn't terribly involved. And what those journal activities built up to a final project at the end, where that was the huge summative task where they applied lots of different things that they learned. But by looking at, I didn't mark the practice pages as products. I found opportunities for observational and conversational assessment pieces throughout the week as I was working with students. And their product for that week was one thing. So I had one piece of paper or one digital journal, because they did them either on paper or digitally, or one digital journal a week per child in math to mark. That ended up saving me a lot of time because it meant I wasn't marking every single thing. And I think that's where we get really overwhelmed with marking it. Now, that doesn't mean I didn't check it. I would check their work, and if they handed it in, they would handed it in digitally. The way I would check their work would simply be to give them a 1 out of 1. So if you had an assignment that was 1 out of 1, that means I'm not marking it. I'm just checking to make sure that you did the work. I'm not checking off you. They were responsible for checking that their answers were correct. Or we would take up a few questions here and there in their page. For those of you that have followed my math in particular, you know that I have differentiated daily math pages. I would use those every single morning with my students. I very rarely marked them. Students would take them up, we would talk about them, we would do them together, but I very rarely collected them, took them home, marked them, wrote it out on my class list. It took way too much time, so I didn't do that. The other ways in other subjects, such as in language, again, same type of thing. They had practice activities that led them to showing me that they could do the learning goal that we set out for the small success criteria, the small learning goal for that. So we had a whole list of things we had to do, but our goal that week was just one. So for language, we have 4 centers activities. One is spelling and grammar, one is working on writing, one is a reading response, and one was meet with me. So those are our 4 centers activities. 3 of those generated products. I did conference with students for their writing, so we would have observations, conversations, and a product for that. They didn't necessarily finish it every week, and they were on a rotational basis, so I wasn't marking it all the time. It was also something I was marking in the moment, which meant when my kids were in class, I was marking it with them live. So that took less time in the evenings for marking because I was doing it right there with them. Reading responses they would do every week, and they would hand those in digitally to me, and it would sit in my Google Classroom, and I would go through those once a week or once every other week, and I would mark them out of 4. Now, when you're marking a weekly reading response over and over and over again, you get pretty good at determining what the level of achievement is. Now, we as a class determined, we sat down and talked about the criteria for assessment of what a level 3 for the reading response looked like, what a level 4 meant, what a level 2 meant, what a level 1 meant. So they would know that when they got a 4 out of 4 or a 3 out of 4 or a 2 out of 4 or a 1 out of 4, that there were some things that they needed to do. I would only typically provide short, written, brief statements of feedback for students that were getting a 2 or a 1 level on their responses. Students that were getting a level 3 or a level 4 knew that they were on track and to keep doing what they were doing. But because of the way Google Classroom or even OneNote or other tools are set up and designed, it's pretty easy to kind of walk yourself through. You see the student's name and you can simply just go, you quickly read it, put the number, quickly read the next one, put the number, quickly read the next one, put the number and a few brief statements. Most of these tools also will provide you with quick comment banks that you can use to help guide you along with that feedback. But it's not necessary to have to write a sentence for every single student, because you have that information. You've talked about that with your students. So it saves you time by just going through and marking them that way. Don't mark, I guess I should have mentioned this earlier too. Don't mark everything with a rubric. Mark it with a checklist. And if you have like a bit of criteria and you have the criteria beside you, like just have the criteria beside you that says, okay, this is what a level 4 looks like. This is what a level 3, this is a level 2, this is level 1, like 4 or 5 criteria for each level. And as the student's work is sitting in front of you, look at it, read it, just like problems for math, word problems for math, looking at writing, reading responses, not a lot of like any fill in the blanks or any like math textbook type stuff that's not word problems. Get the kids to mark that. But anything that you're marking, look at it and go, okay, what is it? Make a decision. Look at their work, read it, look at your criteria, make a decision. Don't hum and haw about it. Trust your gut that you know when you look at that reading response what level it is, because you probably know what level it is by reading it very quickly and looking at it without needing to really hum and haw over too much. And then we have same with their grammar and spelling. Now, this was another one. This was practice. I did not mark their grammar and spelling. Grammar and spelling was something we took up together. So spelling tests, they marked their own, or they marked a peer, and then they tracked their own spelling marks in a spreadsheet that they kept control of. So there was a spreadsheet on Google Sheets that they would enter every week what they received on their spelling test. So that helped track that piece of information. And then we would also look at the grammar. I would not collect every single one. I would collect every other one. I was not marking their like rainbow writing words, because their spelling test or these spelling activities for the week would test whether or not they practice. Some students need to practice a whole ton when it comes to spelling. Some students don't need to practice a lot. So I don't necessarily mandate the amount of practice they need, other than the amount of practice they need is reflective of what they are getting on their spelling test. So if they are somebody who needs to work a little bit harder on spelling, then they might need to practice more than some other students. And that's completely okay. But they have to be kind of in control to determine what that is. Now, the other reason I wasn't necessarily marking some of the grammar and the spelling is because a lot of that I can actually pull and mark through their writing. The goal always of having spelling and grammar programs in your classroom is not so that students can complete worksheets. It's so that students can learn the rules and the spelling patterns of the English language and apply that for when they're writing. So all of the practice that we were doing was to help them apply when they were writing. So my actual assessment of their application of their grammar knowledge was happening in their writing, which means that every time I was marking their writing, I was getting assessment data not only for every aspect of the writing curriculum, but also the spelling and grammar as well. Now, tools. We always want to talk about the tools that you can use when you are marking digitally, when you're marking digital work. So I have always been a firm believer that anytime students can hand in work digitally, it is going to save me much more time than if they hand things in on pencil and paper. Because I'm not recording things on various pages, I can keep everything all in one spot. I can probably take it with me on my phone on the go and mark very quickly. I have things like comment banks to speed up the feedback assessment. I can use digital stickers as well as tools to drag into student digital work that I've made myself that have feedback information. All of that will speed up my ability to mark things quicker when things are submitted digitally to me. So there, you can still, when you're tracking your assessment, you can still have the pencil and paper type assessment. So you've got your class lists and you're still marking, student 1 got a level 4 on this reading response, a level 3 on this reading response, a level 2 on the next one. You can still track that in pencil and paper. Sometimes you just want to have the tactile thing. Just because students are completing work digitally doesn't mean that your tracking of that data needs to be digital. But if you do want to keep everything digital, you can keep everything within your LMS software to track that marking, such as keeping it in D2L or Google Classroom. They all have the ability to show the marks on a spreadsheet, so you can keep those in there. OneNote is another great tool to be able to provide feedback. If your students are in a Microsoft board or using Microsoft tools, having students use OneNote to submit and to assign work and also to be able to provide feedback, written or audio feedback to students, OneNote is great for that. With Google Classroom and with the Google Drive suite, you can add digital stickers through Google Keep, but it's a little bit more cumbersome because there's a lot of things going on. OneNote, it's a little bit easier. Google Classroom 2, you also need some Chrome browser extensions, and it kind of can get a bit convoluted. One of the things I really like about OneNote in terms of marking is if you happen to have a variety, if you have say an iPad with a stylus or a laptop, you can use with OneNote, you can record audio right within the app. You can write right on top of the paper, just like you would pencil and paper. So if you have a stylus, you can actually handwrite notes right next to your students, and you can really treat it much more like paper in a bit more of a seamless way. So I really do like OneNote for that reason. If you happen to have access to the class notebook feature, if you happen to be a Microsoft board. There is other software too that'll let you to track student data, including things like Adosio, Markboard, or even Excel will allow you to replicate some of the paper and pencil tasks that you can do. I like Excel. It will allow you to manipulate different things. One of the things that I use in my role this year is Airtable. It is like Excel, except if you're a visual person, it's a little bit more advanced. I will give a link. I did a whole video on how I track data using Airtable, so I will link to that video in the description. But there's lots of ways that you can track it, and you might have to do some trial and error because there's going to be some things that just work for the way that you work, and you can use a combination of things. I use still the traditional pen and paper. I use Google software. I also use Excel. It's kind of all over the place, but I'm still tracking it. So Mariska, you asked, you bought some digital stickers. Silly question, how do you use them? It's totally not silly because this is just a different way of looking at things. If you said I bought stickers for my classroom, people would think that sounds totally normal. Digital stickers are a little bit different. So it depends on what platform you're using. If you're on a Google-based system and your students are handing in their work through Google Classroom or they're completing their activities on Google Drive, then if you have Google stickers, if you have stickers that you've either made yourself on a product called Canva or on any other image creation app or tool, you can create or buy stickers for students, and then you're going to load up those stickers into Google Keep. From Google Keep, when you have your students' work in front of you, you'll be able to drag them over right on top of the student work. The same can be done in OneNote. You would have OneNote open on your computer screen, and you would have maybe a dual screen sitting on your computer desktop, and you would have just the files of the stickers you wanted. And again, you just drag the sticker you want. It's like putting an image on a PowerPoint slide. You would just drag the image over to what you want the sticker to be. And as long as the stickers tell you or tell the student what they did, maybe they have some words or some descriptors on them that the students know what they mean, then you don't have to be typing out every single time, I really like your picture, nice detail. I really like your picture, nice detail. Or you have great ideas, keep on going. If you find you're writing kind of the same comments over and over again, then a digital sticker will help because you just drag the sticker over and it's there. So I actually am putting together a new video for my remote teacher roadmap, which will include kind of a how-to tutorial on how to make those digital stickers and use them either through OneNote or Google Classroom. So that will be available at www.ml-go.com/RTR. And my remote teacher roadmap is a new workshop course for teachers that are looking at getting through how we use remote tools and how we change our mindset and look at our planning when we're teaching remotely or just teaching digital. So that's kind of how I take my assessment and try to simplify it. Number one, I try to look for opportunities where I can assign tasks that students don't have to do the work, or I try to design the tasks that we can mark it right in class. So if I can use class time to be able to provide that mark, that's gold, especially if I'm looking for observations and conversations. I do not mark all their practice work because I look at practice work as practice. I don't want everything to count. I want kids to be able to practice and mess up and make mistakes and not feel like it matters. I want them to get messy, make it dirty, and if they fail and get it wrong, it doesn't matter because the teacher's not marking this. It's just practice. I'm going to keep going and keep practicing because she's not going to mark the thing until we do it at the end of the week. So I've got lots of time to learn this. It's not that every day I have to do my best every single day and I can't get anything wrong because she's going to mark it and that's going to go on my report card and it's super stressful. It's stressful for the kids. It's stressful for you. So my tip for you is don't mark all the practice work. Keep practice out of your marking and really just look at it as practice. Check it. If you have to check it, then check it. Give it a 1 out of 1. But don't spend more time marking stuff that you can't even use on the report card. If you can't use it, don't waste your time with it. It's really what it comes down to. So that is all that I have for today about assessment. So my goal tonight was to really go through in a bit more of an informal way because it is live. So to go through with an informal way and talk about some of the ways that you can think about assessment, some of the ways you can apply different ideas to how you can simplify some of your assessment strategies so that you are marking less outside of classroom hours, that you are using your time wisely to mark what really matters, to provide your students with the actual information they need to move forward in a way that they can, it informs them, it informs your feedback for them so that they know how to get better the next time. So it's my hope that you got some different tips and ideas on how to simplify your assessment. If you would like more in-depth information and tutorials on how to look at how to convert different lessons in your classroom to fit remote teaching, how to simplify your instructional strategies, your scheduling, your mindset, and assessment practices. All of that is ready to go in more detail in my new workshop course called Remote Teacher Roadmap, which you will find at www.ml-go.com/RTR. Thank you very much for joining me, and we will see you later next week. Bye for now.